You're listening to Real Conversations, where every week we take a peek at the favorite movies of fascinating people. Real Conversations is hosted by Bryan Coley, the founder of Art Within and Real.
Hi, welcome back to Real Conversations. I'm your guest host, Kim Bird, today, and we are continuing on with our third podcast about the Oscars. So the first one we looked at, it was so fascinating to me, Bryan, because we looked at how the Oscar movies that are nominated this year, you believe, which I'm starting to believe, that they're providential.
Making you a believer.
Yes, and that God has orchestrated these movies for such a time as now. That
right.
is telling us where we are
Yeah.
going as a nation, which was really different, but I'm on board. I get that now.
All right, yeah.
And then our second podcast, we talked about the movies that are nominated, and we talked about the dramatic question that they were each asking, which is this idea of, are we going to come together and be a we for the sake of our nation and our home, which
That's
is
exactly
fascinating, right? With the time that we live in now. I mean, that's kind of the biggest challenge now with division. And then today, I'm hoping that you can give me a little bit more of a script to understand how do we get there? And you're telling me, I'm thinking that the movies are actually going to give me a script or an idea of how to get to that third place of bringing it into a we so that we can find a home that we can all live in, right?
Yeah, so he left us with sort of a dramatic question, a cliffhanger of sorts of, will we be a we, and applying that to us as a country right now in which we feel very divided, and how the Oscars are speaking into that very loudly. So I believe equally they are speaking just as loud as to how we become a we, like really answering the question of how do we come together. And I call this episode Back to the Future.
I'm getting my hoverboard.
Nice. And the reason is because I think as we talk through this, there's an element of time that's a really big theme within these Oscars in 2017, as well as a really big revisiting of the past. Like, the past is a huge theme in these movies, and what we glean from the past and what we do with the past is a way for us to become a we in the future. All right, so let's delve into these Oscars 2017 Best Picture nominees and look at how they inform the past. And I think probably the first place to start is to look at how these movies deal with time. And that's the thing that bounced off the screen to me when I first started watching these films, is how a lot of them deal with time. And so I think I'll start with the one that's the easiest one for people to understand as far as time is concerned, and that's Arrival.
Yes, that's
Now,
some
tell
time.
me, do you remember how Arrival deals with time?
Yes, I was like, oh, wait, are we in the past, in the present, in the future? I mean, I was like just eating my box of Milk Duds trying to figure it out. It was just so seamless. I couldn't tell at times.
Right. And so you start with a movie that you think is being told in the present, and then you find out there's part of it that's actually the future.
Yes.
And yet she's narrating it as if it's the past. And so all of this aspect of time is kind of wound up into one big ball that you're going, okay, I don't even know. Maybe this is even outside of time. I'm trying to understand what I'm watching in relationship to time. So that's one movie that just kind of plays with time in a way that's just really fun and allows us to look at the present and the past side by side, and the future even.
Yeah.
And then if you take movies like Lion and Moonlight, you're looking at actually Hacksaw Ridge does this, Hidden Figures does this, even Fences does this, where we have jumps in time.
Yes.
Where we start in one time period. Let's say Moonlight and Lion is as children. Hacksaw Ridge starts as children.
Hidden Figures
starts as children, right? And then we jump in time to another part of their lives. And I believe that jump in time is purposeful for us to be able to look at the past, right? And be able to look at the relationship between the present and the past. Okay, and even a movie like La La Land, which has no jumps in time, feels like a jump in time because you think you're watching this movie that feels like it's set in the 1940s, and yet it's really set in current day. You know, it feels like this old Hollywood film, this musical of the 1940s. They've done it stylistically in a way that feels like the past, and yet it is the future, right?
Yes, that's
Or excuse
true.
me, not the future, the present.
The present. Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's just this deliberate playing with time in the movies that you see. And the big thing that I saw this year that seems to be a trend that I see more and more in editing and in directing is this concept of putting time, the present and the past, side by side. So in the editing style, like, for instance, if I was to say to you, how do you tell the past in movies usually? What would you say?
It's either like a flashback or sometimes it's like, 12 years earlier, and they'll put like something on the screen to make sure you know that we're going back in time.
Exactly. So that used to be the way to do it. But now what you're seeing is this cutting between the present and the past side by side. So for instance, in Manchester by the Sea, Casey Affleck's character is sitting in a chair. He's talking to this lawyer, I think, or a state lawyer who's talking about guardianship of his nephew. And as he's listening to it, we immediately cut to scenes in the past and then cut right back to the present. And this happens with a lot of films. Lion does this. Moonlight does this. Arrival does this. It's just this cutting together of past and present side by side. And I think there's something so important to that, because what these movies are suggesting that we do more of is bring the past right up next to the present. And that is pretty much the theme that I'm going to be talking about over and over again, is how you have to move forward in the present and towards the future by having this past side by side with your present. And that's what you're starting to see, or what I'm starting to see as thematic in these films.
Oh, wow.
I watch a show on television called Timeless, right? And I started watching and noticing that Timeless, The Flash, all these television shows deal with time travel, right?
This Is Us. That's another
right.
one. Mm-hmm.
And that was the one that I was going to talk about, because think about This Is Us. What does This Is Us do as far as time is concerned?
Oh, there's just this beautiful sense of, you see the kids and what's going on in their lives now, and then an immediate flash, and they're young. But it's all kind of paired up with what they're going
together,
through.
Right?
Yeah, it is.
Like there's not this, let's go back and look or something like that. It's like all of a sudden you're watching a scene of the parents, and that's side by side with their children as grown children, right? Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what's happening with this cutting together or editing together the past and the present. And I don't know if it's a subconscious thing or it's a conscious thing. Obviously, it's a conscious thing to some degree as far as directing, but to have this happening all at once and thematically blending in with what the Oscars are saying, I think is really, really foundationally important to how we answer this question of how we become a we.
Yeah, because you're looking at this, again, this past moment, maybe in a defining moment in one of the characters' lives, and then they're always showing it paired up with where they are now. So maybe they're struggling with the struggle they have now, and all of a sudden they show you that originated when they were 7, and those things are paired together and they haven't moved on, or they need to kind of come to grips so they can move on.
Right.
Wow. Okay, that makes sense.
So this idea of time is big, and even I would say even with La La Land, it doesn't do any sort of jumping in time or anything like that, but it does give us 2 timelines.
I know.
Right?
That was a huge fight in our household.
Exactly. So what happens is you are offered 2 timelines that you want to choose at the end, right?
Sort of, yeah, you do. Yes.
Yeah. So and really, even at the end, when in this epilogue that we're talking about, he's going back in time to reimagine what would it look like if I made a different choice. Right. So he goes back in time to say, let me look at the past and see what would happen if this would have happened, and how that would affect the present. Right. So once again, we're dealing with time, going back and looking at time and saying, how does that inform the present? And this idea of the past is really huge from the standpoint of characters revisiting the past. But the manner in which we revisit the past is very important. And so that's what I want to kind of spend the rest of this episode looking at, is the way these characters revisit the past and how all those ways in which they do it can inform the way we as people and as a country need to take the past and bring it up side by side to the present.
Wow.
So let's go with one aspect of addressing the past. And I'll use Lion as the movie Lion as the best example of this. And that is, you have a boy who was lost and orphaned as a child. We jump forward in time and see him as an adult. And he's in Australia, in a totally different place than India where he grew up. And yet he can't move forward in his life in Australia Even though he's having this, he has a good life. He
Yeah.
has a girlfriend.
Loves his family.
He's got this other home that he's dealing with. And yet he can't seem to move forward because he's got these haunting questions about his past, right? He doesn't know whether his mom's still alive. He doesn't know whether his brother's still alive. He doesn't know whether they've been searching for him all this time after being lost as a child. And so he has these haunting questions that he needs to physically go back to the past in order to answer. And so he takes a trip and a journey back to India to try to find his home. And once he figures out where it is, then he's going to go answer all these questions. And that's pretty much that movie, right? Moonlight is very similar in that same way, where, we watch a guy fall in love as a teenager. And when we see him in his present, so he's an adult now, we know that he has these questions that have been haunting him and that he needs to go answer about love, whether this guy still loves him. And so he takes a literal journey to address the past and address these haunting questions. And to me, that's the first aspect of revisiting the past that's important that these characters show us. It's the idea of we must revisit the past in order to shape our present and our future. But the thing we need to do is answer some of those haunting questions.
So it's like we need to understand the story. We need to understand what happened in order and really make sense of those things, not just wash over them, but really get some more clarity and understanding.
Yeah. And I don't know what this looks like. I'm sure there are plenty of questions that we need to go back in our past as a country and answer that are still hanging out there and haunting us. But I think that's one path of looking at the past and bringing it side by side to the present. And maybe on a personal level, I hope that when people listen to this podcast, that they don't think of this as, well, I can't do anything about that. How is our country going to go back and look at it? But I think there's a personal application for all of this too, where we can go, part of being the solution is maybe this first step of answering haunting questions about the past in my life or in my family life or in my situation, whatever situation it is, might be a part of creating a we with whoever I'm trying to create a we with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, rather than just repeating the same things over and over and not really taking a hard look at why am I doing this or what was the past or what can be better.
Exactly. And that brings me to the next Oscar film that kind of shows us another version of how to deal with the past or revisit the past. And that is Manchester by the Sea. Manchester by the Sea, just real quickly, you think it's a movie about Casey Affleck's character is just going back to his birth home, and he's just trying to deal with his brother dying and whether he's going to take guardianship of his nephew. But as the movie kind of unveils, you figure out that, wow, this town represents a huge tragedy in his life that he's trying to avoid. He doesn't want to be here. He doesn't want to revisit the past because the past is filled with a huge tragedy. And this is a spoiler, so if you don't want to hear this, then you skip over this. But, he's found out, we find out that through this intercutting, like I said, of the present and the past, that he had his children burned in a house fire, and it was somewhat his fault. And then through several different cutting throughout the film, you find out that his marriage, that was beautiful marriage, is totally torn apart by this. And so when he's coming back in the present, he's dealing emotionally. He's trying to shut himself off from the pain and the loss that's happened in this town. And of course, he's running face to face into his wife that he had, in which he's separated from. So that really becomes the story of what Manchester by the Sea is about, is him dealing emotionally and almost forgiving himself for his sins in the past and dealing with that. So to me, another path to the past that, again, has application, I believe, to America and to us personally, is that if we want to get along or come together as a nation, we have to go back and revisit the past and see the sins of our past. We have to revisit the pain and the loss that's happened in our past. We have to bring that into the present side by side for us to move to the future.
Well, and it's interesting too, because in those, examples that you gave, Manchester by the Sea, Moonlight Lion. I mean, you start also looking at people that are motivated out of courage to take a look, because it takes a lot of courage, but also out of love. I mean, there is a sense of love that draws them. Even Manchester, like, it's devastating what he's going through, but there's a responsibility he has to his nephew.
Yeah.
So there is a sense of love that draws them, which is interesting, because that's challenging in